is Emily Holland, and I'm the editor of Poet Lore, which is America's oldest poetry magazine, published here at the Writers Center. We publish 2 print issues a year. Our next issue is in the final stages of production now, and it's our first issue featuring a guest edited folio. And this issue's guest editor is Tarfia Faizullah. So I'm super excited to have her selections out in the world soon. But, check out Poet Lore. I think Zach put the link in the chat. Subscribe so that you can get that new issue, or check out some of our previous issues online as well. That's all about me, and I'm just so excited to welcome you to the Writers Center Virtual Craft Chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little more about how they wrote it. Please welcome tonight's guest, Kaveh Akbar. Thank you so much for being here, Kaveh. If you could maybe unmute yourself and just introduce yourself a little bit, tell us who you are, talk about your new book, Pilgrim Bell, which we'll talk about today, and maybe read 1 or 2 poems to kind of get us started.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Zach. And thank you, everyone, for coming through. My name is Kaveh Akbar. My pronouns are he, him, though any respectful address is fine. I am coming to you from sunny, sexy West Lafayette, Indiana, where everyone's, just dying to be. I know. It's actually like, it looks like it's about to start raining. I was born in Tehran, Iran. I have lived everywhere, but this is where I live right now, and I like it quite well. I'm really excited to be here. I remember when I was in high school, I had a seminal high school English teacher, like I think a lot of poets or people who turn into writing or making words their living. A lot of us have this as part of our stories, having a seminal high school English teacher. Mine was named Steve Henn, Henn, who was an incredible poet himself. And he, one day he sent me home with a stack of poetry journals. And it was just like, I remember opening up the first one, and it was like the clouds parted and an angel came through and blared his trumpet, and he was just like, "Burr, burr, 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 you're a poet." It was like that sort of like shock of clarity. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, oh, like, I guess this is the thing that I am, like if you can do poetry, like, why does anyone waste their time doing like chemistry or doing taxes, or what I mean? It was just like, this is like obviously the thing that is the best thing. Why would anyone do anything else? And so and I bring this up to say Poet Lore was in that stack of journals that I got from
Amazing.
And so I remember discovering a poet named Lisa Glatt, Glatt, in those. I have no idea. This would have been, 2005 maybe. But I remember discovering a poet named Lisa Glatt, and in those, and being like, oh my God, like this is the best poem anyone's ever written. I still really admire Lisa Glatt, but so Poet Lore has been a part of my life in poetry since I had anything resembling a life in poetry. So it's an honor to get to be here and to get to be a part. As Emily generously said, I have a new book out. It looks like this. It's on the internet if you're interested in that sort of thing. There are also lots of other great books out, which some of my favorites this year. Miter Vang has a really, really great book coming out. Philip B. Williams has a great book called Mutiny that's coming out that I'm really excited about. I've read The Galleys, but I'm excited to hold the finished thing. Danica Kelly has a book called The Renunciations that really bowled me over. There are a million books that I'm really excited about, but this one is is the one that I wrote. And so I'm just going to read maybe one poem from it, and then we can sort of talk to each other. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. So this poem is called, this is one of the first poems in the book, and it's called The Miracle Oh, Tarfia also had a book out just a couple of years ago that was really, really wonderful. Tarfia Faizullah, Faizullah. And that was really wonderful. If you guys haven't read that, she's brilliant. This poem is called The Miracle. It's one of the early poems in the book. It in Islam, the sort of like bedrock miracle of the faith is literacy. The story goes that the Prophet Muhammad was alone and fasting in a cave, sort of camping, and the angel Gabriel came to him and said, read, and the Prophet Muhammad was illiterate, like many men in his time and place in the world. He didn't know how to read, right? And so he was like, I'm sorry, I can't help you, I'm illiterate, right? And so the angel Gabriel like grabs him and like squeezes him so tight, and suddenly he's able to read, and he begins to transcribe what would become the Quran, right? And this is how the Quran is revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And so in many ways, like literacy is sort of like the catalytic miracle of the faith, right? Which I always thought was kind of cool as a poet. So yeah, that's all you really need to know. This is called The Miracle. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to like make it so that you can see me and not my fish tanks. The Miracle. Gabriel seizing the illiterate man alone and fasting in a cave and commanding, read. The man saying, I can't. Gabriel squeezing him tighter, commanding, read. The man gasping, I don't know how. Gabriel squeezing him so tight he couldn't breathe, squeezing out the air of protest, the air of doubt, crushing it out of his crushable human body, saying, read in the name of your Lord who created you from a clot. And thus, literacy, revelation. It wasn't until Gabriel squeezed away what was empty in him that the prophet could be filled with miracle. Imagine the emptiness in you, the vast cavities you have spent your life trying to fill with fathers, mothers, lovers, language, drugs, money, art, praise, and imagine them gone. What's left? Whatever you aren't, which is what makes you. A house useful not because it's floorboards or ceilings or walls, but because the empty space between them. Gabriel isn't coming for you. If he did, would you call him Jibril or Gabriel like you are here? Who is this even for? One crisis at a time. Gabriel isn't coming for you. Cheese on a cracker, a bit of salty fish. Somewhere a man is steering a robotic plane into murder. Robot from the Czech robota, meaning forced labor. Murder labor, forced. He never sees the bodies which are implied by their absence, like feathers on a paper bird. Gabriel isn't coming for you. In the absence of cloud parting, trumpet blaring clarity, what? More living, more money, lazy sex, mother, brother, lover, you travel and bring back silk scarves, a bag of chocolates for you don't know who yet. Someone will want them. Deliver them to an empty field. You fall asleep facing the freckle on your wrist. Somewhere a woman presses a button that locks metal doors with people behind them. The locks are useful to her because there is an emptiness on the other side that holds the people's lives in place. She doesn't know the names of the people. Anonymity is an ancillary feature of the locks. Ancillary from the Latin ancilla, meaning servant, an emptiness to hold all their living. You created from a clot. Gabriel isn't coming for you. You too full to eat. You too locked to door, too cruel to wonder. Gabriel isn't coming. You too loved to love, to speak, to hear, too wet to drink. No, Gabriel, you too pride to weep. You too play to still. You too high to come. No, Gabriel won't be coming for you. Too fear to move. You too pebble to stone. Too saddle to horse. Too crime to pay. Gabriel, no, not anymore. You too gone to save, too bloodless to martyr, too diamond to charcoal, too nation to earth. You brute, cruel pebble. Gabriel, God of man, no, cheese on a cracker. Mercy, mercy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for starting with that poem and that beautiful reading. That's one of the poems that I've been returning to a lot as I've been kind of coming up with more questions and things. So thank you for reading that. And I'm sure we'll talk about
time of book.
I did want to say a few things before we really begin. One, buy the book. We really encourage everyone to get up a copy from your local bookseller or through bookshop.org, which will pop a link in the chat. But also, if you haven't had a chance yet to pick up a copy, we are raffling 2 copies today at this craft chat. So please put your name in the chat along with the name of your favorite poet or your favorite poem that you've recently read, and we'll do a random generator to populate those winners later in the chat. So I always love watching the chat fill up with poems and poets that people are reading recently. So definitely enter if you don't have a copy yet. We have 2 to give away. And to really kind of start off on a kind of general note, you know, I always say that poets are in the business of noticing things, right? We write our obsessions, we write what we experience, what we see. And so I'm curious, is there something that you do in your own work, maybe consciously or unconsciously, that goes unnoticed by readers? Maybe it's a habit or some kind of craft element, or like a writerly tick that slips by some discerning eyes.
Is there something you're saying? Is there something that I do that goes unnoticed by readers? That's yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably. It might. I mean, but I'm my first reader. You know, there's most of what I do goes unnoticed by me too. You know, I and I'm not really sure. I mean, you know, I'm not on the things, right? And so I don't really know what people are noticing or not. I mean, you know, it's nuts that like you said that you've come back to that poem multiple times, and like I still haven't gotten over the part of being a writer that's just like dumbfounded that people who aren't like blood relatives are reading my shit at all, you know? So yeah, I don't, it's hard for me to be like, yeah, this is the thing that nobody's noticed and like someone should pick up on like how brilliant I was. You know what I mean? I don't know. There's a poem in the book. If anyone has the book, there's a poem in the book that is a kind of like, I guess it's like a double golden shovel, which is a form invented by Terrence Hayes, paying homage to Gwendolyn Brooks, that doesn't draw any attention to itself for being this thing. It's like, it's not like this is a golden shovel or anything like that, but there's a poem in the book called Against the Parts of Me That Think They Know Anything, that like, if you read it up this margin and down this margin, both margins have the first line of the poems written along the margins, but like, I don't know why anyone would ever notice that. It was just like how I happened to write the poem. Yeah, that sort of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely went back to that poem after I
Oh,
read
for real?
the notes where it
Yeah. Oh, I
mentioned.
just never assume anyone reads the notes.
And
Yeah.
I love the notes. I actually, most times I read the notes before reading the book, just to kind
Oh,
of
for
know
real?
what I'm getting into. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to like see. I mean, I do that too, but I just always assume that that's like a nerdy quirk of mine. You know? Like it's just like I'm always interested in people you know, who people are like sort of bringing into their own sort of personal constellations, right? Like these are the people who are like peopling my night sky, you know, like these are the influences that have like indelibly inflected my voice and the algorithms of my thinking, right? This sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, that's just because I'm sort of like, I'm interested in poetry and poems, but I'm also sort of just like anthropologically interested in the behaviors of poets, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think too that, you know, poetry is so much of a conversation between all the poems that came before and all the poems that will come after. And I love
No,
seeing
totally,
all
yeah.
those influences. And your Anne Carson shirt, I think, is pulling in one of those
Oh
influences,
yeah, can
right?
you see that?
Amazing shirt.
Yeah,
Just had to call it out.
my spouse, this transcendent American poet, Paige Lewis, they got this for me. I have no idea from where, but yeah, it's like,
Incredible.
I don't, it's like one of the shirts that I wear. I don't know. I'm not like a fashion boy, but you know, it's like one of the shirts that is in my cycle of shirts to wear.
Since you brought up the golden shovel-esque kind of poem, I wondered if we could talk a little bit about form, because you
Yeah.
also use the hustle, and there's the kind of form with the punctuation of the title poems, the Pilgrim Bell poems, and then the form of the sort of segmented pieces with the square in the typography, and of course the shape poem, the mirror poem. There's so many different kind of playful forms going on. So I wonder if you could talk about the influence that form, both, you know, kind of invented and received form, has on your work, and how it helped shape this collection.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I mean, everything is in a form, right? Like you can't use language without it. I mean, even if it's just like a block of unpunctuated prose arranged randomly around the page is a form, right? Like within the, you know, I mean, um, if I eat food off a plate, the plate is the form of the food, right? Or like if the food is dripping off the plate, right? The plate is still sort of like the thing that the food is, um, overwhelming, right? Um, and so yeah, I mean, you know, I am obviously interested in received forms, and I'm someone who just writes a lot, right? I write a lot and I publish very little. Um, and so, you know, just I find myself writing language, and I am interested in, you know, recursion, right? And I'm interested in repetition. So maybe that leads me to a recursive repetitive form like a villanelle, right? Or I am interested in rhyme that is sort of like embedded within the middle of a line instead of end rhyme. So I think there's like a rhyming sonnet in the book, but the rhymes are sort of like a beat or two before the end of the poem, right? You know, there's yeah, I don't, yeah, the title, the titular Pilgrim Bell poems are in this sort of funny form that came about through kind of trying to play with silence in a way and trying to imagine ways to build silence as the fundamental architectonic element of the poem, and the language as just the sort of negative space around the silence, and how poets before me have done that, right? Poets like Jean Valentine, for instance, is one of the people I really look up to a lot in thinking about how to build out of an architecture of silence where the language is just the sort of negative space. Yeah. So I mean, I just, you know, I just follow the language, and the language leads me to form.
Yeah, that kind of mirroring of content and form, and how those fit together and
Yeah.
expand in a way. And with regards to teaching and maybe with your students, do you have advice for people just kind of getting into forms? I think sometimes early poets, I know myself included, I was like, I don't like form, it's too restrictive. But now I can kind of see the ways that it really brings out kind of a different elements of work, and it can be expansive rather than restrictive. So do you have any advice for poets, you know, just kind of starting to work with forms in their own way?
Yeah. I mean, I'm I'm leery of ever giving advice because I don't know. I just, I'm just figuring it all out like anyone else. But and so I don't want to speak too prescriptively, but I can say that for me, writing in received forms is another way of sort of getting underneath my ego and getting underneath my consciousness. Like if I'm sitting down in front of a page, and I'm just like writing in a way that is completely unmediated by anything. I'm just like, I'm looking at a blank, pretend this is a blank sheet of paper and doesn't have my writing all over it, but like I'm looking at a blank sheet of paper and I'm just like, all right, I have to fill this with some brilliant lyric. I mean, that's immobilizing, right? But if I'm working within a form that begins to give the language a shape, right? And it also forces my brain to think in directions or to deploy language that wouldn't have ordinarily been a part of my most readily accessible psychic vernacular. I mean, the average native English speaker speaks about 3,000 to 5,000 words a day, right? And of those 3,000 to 5,000 words spoken a day, only about 10% denote actual semantic meaning, right? So like if I am and so that to say, like when we are like most immediately like reaching to grab a word, right, we're reaching off of like a pretty bare shelf, right? Like we all know tens or hundreds of thousands of words, right? But when we actually like those words that are like within an arm's reach, it's like it's not a very full shelf, right, for any of us, right? And so working within forms helps me to stretch a little bit further, you know what I mean, past those words that are most readily accessible, right, and into shells behind that might be more sort of illuminating for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of, you know, urging your mind to reach past the immediate and kind of go back into the archives.
Yeah. Also, I just looked at the chat for a second and I saw that my friend Joy Priest is here. Joy Priest has a really, really brilliant book called Horsepower that everyone should read. If you guys haven't read Horsepower, it's really, really incredible. Hey, Joy. I didn't know you were going to be here. That's great. Horsepower is brilliant. I teach it. It's incredible. Oh yeah, now people are saying nice things about Horsepower. Sorry, it's hard for me to keep up on the chat while it's hard.
No, yeah,
Anthony's.
it's kind of that screened multitasking where there's so many different windows, and I will say this is probably our most attended event, so thank you all for being
Oh,
here.
cool. Yeah, thanks.
And I wanted to say to everyone in the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I do keep an eye on the chat and I love to weave in audience questions as we can. So definitely pop them in there as they come to you, or if you came prepared with some questions, we'd love to get them into the conversation as well. And you mentioned silence, especially with those Pilgrim Bell poems, with the kind of period, and rereading those and kind of really settling in on the pauses and reading them aloud. I kind of had this idea of those periods almost working like a bell, where it has like kind of a loud presence like visually on the page, but then they're followed by that silence after the sound. And then there's so many ways that silence is kind of worked into this manuscript. So I wonder if you could talk about how silence plays a role in your writing and editing process, and how it kind of played a role in crafting this collection, maybe in comparison to your previous collection as well.
Yeah, that's a beautiful and generous question. Thank you for reading the book so well. It's a gift to have gotten to spend this time with you. When I wrote my first book, I was very much sort of out at sea, floating on a 2x4, just kind of like desperately like hiding in poems, because it was like a place, if I'm writing a poem that's like 2 hours or 4 hours where I don't have to worry about accidentally killing myself, right? Like it's just like that's a place to put myself, like literally, like more than anything sort of like highfalutin or aesthetic, right? It's just a place to be, right? That book, for anyone who's read it, knows that it was very much orbiting early recovery, And it was sort of my early recovery narrative, right? So I was, yeah, I mean, the poems were just a place to put myself, right? And that book came from that process. My new book, Pilgrim Bell, um, I've had a little bit more time to sit with, right? My life has gotten, that first book was written during a very sort of monastic period of my life where really all I was doing was trying to stay sober and not doing a whole lot else. I was worked some crappy jobs. I did school, but I didn't have a lot going on. Um, and so my life was very, very quiet, relatively speaking. And so the poems got to be very noisy and bombastic and sort of super saturated. This new book, in the interim between the two books, I've gotten married, I've become a teacher in a bunch of different places. I have gotten to travel around and gotten to meet a lot of really incredible poets, and my inbox is never not yelling at me, what I'm saying? So like my life has just gotten noisier, right? And so I think that I became more invested in building a place in the poems where I could experience silence, right? The appeal of really noisy, sort of sonically super saturated poems was lost to me, right? And now where I want to go in a poem is a kind of quiet place. And I also think that, you know not to put too fine a point on it, but um I've lost a number of beloveds, and I think a lot about how if you imagine um if you imagine the lost beloveds as like your upstairs neighbor in an apartment, right? You can't actually see them, uh but you can like knock on the ceiling, right? And that knocking on the ceiling, and then they stomp on the ceiling back at you, and it's the thing that separates you that actually becomes the medium of your communication, right? It's the thing that is like in between you, that is how you communicate, right? You can't communicate by talking to them, right? You can't communicate by looking at them, right? It's the thing that's between you that allows you to communicate with them. Um and there's a lot of silence between me and the things that I love best. There's a lot of stillness and absence and distance between me and the things that I love and the people that I love best. And so I think that a big part of the project of this book is that sort of knocking on the ceiling to see like what, if anything, knocks back.
Wow. Yeah, that was thank you for that generous answer. I feel like we all just need to sit with that for a second. Someone in the chat did wonder if you'd be willing to read one of the Pilgrim Bell poems.
Yeah, sure. I see that the chat is I periodically look over and I see that it's doing things, but I can't be present with you, Emily, if I'm also, so I
No
apologize
worries.
for saying like wise and smart things that I'm not able to acknowledge in time. I promise in the fullness of time, we're all babies in this universe and we'll live forever and we'll all get to like bask in each other's brilliance and so. I'm reading a Pilgrim. Is there any specific Pilgrim Bell poem, or just any of them?
I think any of them, whichever one is calling to you at this moment.
Okay. Well, my immediate impulse is to read like the shortest one because it's like then I don't have, but no, I won't do that. Uh okay. I think this is the last Pilgrim Bell poem in the book. Spoilers. Pilgrim Bell. The self I am today involves me as a lake involves its cattails. It bears me, tolerates my cotton. I would prefer not to be outlived by anyone. I reserve the right to refuse enchantment. The fables I tell always end wrong. The good archer dead by a stream. By a stream, the villains counting their gold. I am so vulnerable to visionaries and absolute certainty. Tell me how to live, and I will live that way.
Thank you. It's great to hear you read and to really feel what the punctuation is doing in the poem. And I think maybe we could talk a little bit about how that punctuation is working to almost create kind of new units of meaning. I feel like with poems, we have the unit of the line, which is kind of its own unit, but even with those poems, either lines can be spliced in different ways by the periods, and it's not always in kind of a clause. It can interrupt the clauses and things like that. So could we talk a little bit about meaning and enjambment and punctuation and how that works into your practice?
Yeah, one of the things that I realized and ended up thinking, I mean, so much of the project of this book is me learning to sit in uncertainty without groping desperately to resolve it. I think that so much of the crises of my living that I've brought upon myself and that I've brought upon other people have been when I have been absolutely certain of something and tried to impress upon everyone else my certainty, right? I think that just leads to my own suffering and the suffering of the people who love me. I think that I find that the people who tend to speak most in absolute certainties are zealots and tyrants today, right? And so part of my psychospiritual growth that this book was there to help me with, that these poems are an almost like cartographic record of my navigating, is the process of becoming and trying to learn to be more and more comfortable sitting in uncertainty and just like being there, right? And not trying to desperately resolve it or settle for sort of facile or false or flattened answers, right? And the more that I'm thinking about this, and the more that I'm thinking about my general skepticism of the English language in general, right? Like the English language is the most deadly colonial weapon ever invented, right? I mean, it's a weapon that has been used in the building and deployment of nuclear weapons. It's been used to take us to the brink of irreversible ecological collapse. The indigenous genocide, the billion trillion imperial projects of European and American states, chattel slavery. I mean, like all of the most gruesome artifacts of humanity have been aided and abetted by the tool that I use to write my poetry, right? This technology, this literally man-made technology. And so I think that implies I think that compels me to be quite skeptical of the medium of my art, right? And part of that skepticism is the realization that in the English language, we have 4 sentence types, right? We have declarative, imperative, interrogative, and exclamatory, right? And the 2 types of sentences in the English language that take periods are called imperative and declarative. isn't that fucked up? Like you just like go around declaring things and like ordering people around. Like that's the two ways that we have to talk to each other, right? The two ways that we have to use the period, which is the most common punctuation mark in the English language. The two ways that we have to use those are imperative, like go do this, right? Or declarative, like this is the case, right? Those are the two things in the English language that take periods, right? And I mean, like, just think about what that does over like centuries of using this technology, right? What that does to the algorithms of your thinking, right? When all you do is just go around and declare shit or like boss people around, you know, speaking in imperatives, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I part of the project of those poems was learning to ignore the period, you know, learning to put the period on a page and then just move the sentence right past it, you know, to learn to, I mean, it is a grammatical demarcator of certainty, right? It says this is a sentence, right? This is either a declarative, this is either a, you know, something that I am asserting to be true, something that I'm asserting to know, or it is something that I'm telling you to do, right? And part of the project of those poems was learning to ignore that, right? To literally move past that certainty.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Lots of great reaction in the chat. And also in the chat are our two raffle winners, Jackie Bangfort and Farhan Yousaf. So if you check the chat now, our communications director, Zach Powers, has posted his email. Please reach out to him for the mailing address, and then we'll send the books in the mail so you can get your copy as soon as possible. Let me scroll up in the chat because we had a lot of good questions coming in too, and I don't want to miss them. Kimberly Ramos is asking about revision, and I think this is a really interesting question. They write, the ending of Forfeiting My Mystique differs from its appearance in an issue of poetry and your new book, Pilgrim Bell. How do you decide what pieces of a poem to revise, and how do you decide on the nature of the revision itself?
Who asked that question?
Kimberly Ramos.
I don't know you, Kimberly Ramos, but you're reading my book super closely. That's great. That's a trip. Yeah. That was a poem that I published a long time. I mean, a long time ago means like 4 or 5 years ago, but like it feels like a very long time ago, you know. And you know, I've been like 8 different people in that time, you know. And yeah, I mean the ending of the original version was something like, if I'm important in any way, I'm important like a deer on the side of the road, something to drive past and catch the white of, or something like that, right? And I don't know, something about that struck me as like too facile or flat, or maybe just like to catch the white of being like, I don't know, like my own, I don't know. There's just something about that seemed too facile and flat for me. Again, like part of the vector of my growth has been away from easy and falsely clarified narratives, right? And that felt a little bit too easy for me. It just felt a little bit so I guess zooming out, you asked about the more global, like how revision works for me. I mean, honestly, like the poems become ideogrammatic to me, right? Like they become like Mandarin characters, right? Where like you read it at a glance, right? Or like hieroglyphs, right? Like it's like all of the psychospiritual data, experiential data, emotional data there in the poem, I can conjure with a glance, right? I can like look at it without actually like engaging the language. I mean, like, I don't know. I imagine that most of the poets here know what I'm talking about, right? Like where you've looked at a poem for so long that you don't actually have to read every word of the poem to like know what the poem is up to. You know what I'm saying? And the two interventions that I have against that are both kind of the one is handing it to someone who I trust, who hasn't been so habituated to the poem and for whom the poem is still, you know, a small machine made out of words, right? um, uh, or to just like put some temporal distance between me and the poem, right? To like walk away from the poem for 3 or 6 or 12 months or whatever. I mean, I'm also someone who doesn't have a lot of anxiety about not publishing everything that I write. I think that um, my imagination is an infinite reservoir. My experience is a very finite reservoir. I only have so many stories, and my spouse has heard them all. You know what I mean? But like, so my experience is a very finite reservoir, but my imagination is infinite, right? Language is infinite, right? And so knowing that the poems come from language and imagination and not from, me just being like, here is what happened to me and here's what you can learn from it, right? Makes I mean, I've long since disabused myself of the notion that there's any sort of scarcity to what I can do with language. So I don't have a problem with putting poems away and never bringing them back out or this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's such a comfort to hear. I think as poets, I always feel like when I draft a poem and I feel really good about it, I'm like, what if this is the last good poem I write? And I think there's
Yeah,
that fear,
yeah,
but the
yeah.
way
Well,
that you
and there's
put it
always
is comforting.
yeah. See, the way that that manifests for me and my ego is that like every time I write a poem, I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but every time I write a poem, I'm just like, yo, like who's gonna like deliver the Brinks truck to my front yard for like having solved every problem, in the world, with this like magisterial masterpiece that I've just wrought from the ether. You know what I mean? Like that's like me every time I write a poem. And then like every time the next day, I'm like, oh, that's a draft. You know what I mean?
Mhm, mhm.
And there's like always that weird, yeah, I don't know, I mean, like I'm an addict. The high that I chase today, the like of the highs that I still have available to me having written is the best. It like keeps me up the longest. It's like it's the cleanest burning, it's the most accessible. And so like when I get my drug of choice today, right, I'm like floating 6 inches. I'm like, if I like wake up at 6 and write a draft of a poem, you can't tell me shit the rest of the day. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like it doesn't matter what else happens that day. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like floating, and then yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that is definitely a great way to approach writing and to approach the page, and even thinking about that blank page
Yeah.
as a source of sometimes anxiety. Just getting there and getting the work out
Yeah.
is a triumph, and I think that
Totally,
that's great.
totally. It really is a triumph. I mean, like that's such a good word for it. It's like that thing of, I mean, you wrought from the ether what never would have existed had it not been for your being there. You know what I mean? Like had it not been for you and your unprecedented experience being there and choosing in that moment to like wring that out of the ether, it just never would have existed, right? And that's a trip. I mean, I read poetry for the nation, this and it's not, I mean, you will never ever hear me using the term slush pile. I work with someone, and the first thing that I asked the person with whom I work was to not use that term for our submittable queue. You know what I mean? Because it's such a profound privilege to be trusted with like these fucking miracles. You know what I mean? Like these people, I'm sorry, I'm like getting excited, but like these people like wring this stuff out of the ether, and like they like make this thing that never would have existed had it not been for them being there. And then they're like, here, do you want to see? And then like people call that like slush, like people denigrate that, and they're
Mhm.
like, oh, I had to read so many. It's like, I'm getting goosebumps talking about this. Like, do you understand the like profound gift that you're being given? And then you being like I just never got that. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I've just never gotten over that.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way when I read submissions for Poet Lore. I mean, it's not just such an incredible privilege, but it's such an inspiration when I go back to the page and when I go to put my work out in the world, to know that on either end, where there's always this give and take, and this kind of generosity that comes with writing and sending it out and reading. And yeah, I definitely am here for the no slush, no slush mantra.
Yeah.
Um, since you mentioned your work with The Nation, I wondered how your work as an editor, but also as a teacher, um, comes into your own writing process and how it influences your own kind of writing, editing, drafting process. And also, you edited the forthcoming anthology on the Penguin Book of Spiritual Verse. So, how do all of these kind of different hats that we wear as poets work into your craft?
Yeah. It makes me very, very humble. I see the volumes of incredible verse being written just today, by living poets. And then like with the Penguin Book of Spiritual Verse, I'm tracking 43 centuries of the human project of spiritual writing from the earliest attributable author in all of human literature, which was Enheduanna, a Sumerian priestess. Not for nothing, the earliest attributable author in all of human literature was a Middle Eastern woman. But she was a Sumerian priestess, and I mean, like, her poems hold up. You know what I mean? They do all the things that we're doing today, and then you go through history and you go to the Epic of Gilgamesh and Bhagavad Gita, and and the Psalms and the Song of Songs, and and you keep going through the Kebra Nagast. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just like there's not a country that you can go to and a continent that you can go to, or a continent that you can go. I mean, there's not a country that you can go to that doesn't have like an incredibly rich history of this thing, right? And so it makes me very humble. I'm like one little breath whispering into this conversation that has preceded me by millennia and will continue long after the last person has forgotten my name. And yeah, I mean, if I can get like a little soapboxy for a second, the about 3% of the book about 3% of the literature that is bought in America was not originally composed in English. Or maybe a better way to say that is 97% of the literature that is purchased in America was originally composed in English, which is to say we have a very, very, very provincial view of like the conversation that is happening in global letters right now, right? We have a very, very provincial view, right? Even if like 15% of, even if you're 5 times better than the average American reader, even if 15% of what you read is stuff that was originally composed in another language and translated into English, right? That still means that like 85% of your reading is coming from, just a handful of countries, right? There's so much of the conversation that you're not privy to if you're not reading work in other languages or in translation. And it leads to such a these provincial obsessions, right? It leads to the sense that like what is happening in America is the only thing that's happening in the world, right? And like, I mean, it's just not, and it's easy to, I mean, just in the same way that like you read Marilyn Nelson and you learn something, right? You read Sharon Olds and you learn something about the experience of being a human being, right? In the same way, like you can read Garis Abdul-Malakian, right, and learn something about being a human being in a part of the world that we just don't talk about here. You know what I mean? And or like any number of the brilliant non-English language writers, which again is like the vast majority of people writing today. Okay, I'll come off my soapbox for a second now, but
this is definitely a space where soapboxes are welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to be. I'm still figuring all this stuff out, but yeah. So I mean, we brought up The Nation, and like a big part of my project at The Nation has been to publish more work in translation, more work by incarcerated writers, and so that's one of the things that I'm proud of about the stuff that we're doing there.
Yeah, I saw someone in the chat mention that The Nation is open for translations, and
oh yeah, yo, if people here have translations, send them to me, please. I'm desperate to read your I'm so interested in that. I'm so interested in getting voices that I don't know about, that our readers might know about, into this conversation, right? Because again, like it's just so. I mean, like, yeah, American poets don't even read like Canadian poets. You know what I mean? Like every, you know, I've been to, you know, I've been very lucky in my poetry life, and I've gotten to go to, you know, Trinidad and Lagos, Nigeria, and India, and, you know, and everyone in these places like knows our poets, you know what I mean? Like all of the poets in Lagos are reading like Danez and, you know, Solmaz, and, you know, they know our poets, right? And I mean, like, you know, I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but I would wager to guess most of the people here don't read a lot of like contemporary living Nigerian poets, you know what I'm saying? Or contemporary living Indian poets, you know what I mean? And there's just no reason for that, you know? Like we don't, yeah, someone in the chat says we don't read British poets. I mean, like it's like we don't. Like how many British poets are like contemporary American poets reading? Like it's nuts, right? Logan February, shout out Logan February, my literal MFA student, like literally taught them in my classroom last night. Yeah, shout out Logan February. Everyone read Logan. But yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, it's just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I've made my point.
Yeah, I'll also add that Poet Lore also accepts translation submissions too. So send them to both of us. We're eager to read translations and get new voices out into the world. There were a few questions that kind of circled around the idea of organizing a collection. So I'm wondering about the kind of organizing principles that drive you when you're putting together a collection. You know, how do you kind of determine the order for the poems, and in the sections, if there's sections? These are kind of the almost existential questions that we all grapple with when we put together our manuscripts. But I think there were a few people that were curious just about that kind of level of putting together of the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably there are people here who are better equipped to talk about this than me. Probably there are people here who are better equipped to talk about all of this than me. But you know, I mean, I've published 2 books, you know, I don't know. So much of it is still just me learning and sort of finding my way through it, right? I mean, it's true, I help a lot of people sort of move through their collections and imagine ways for them to work. But so, I mean, it's honestly just like you read 10,000 poetry books and you learn something about how poetry books are assembled. You know what I mean? Like you read, you know, when Steve Henn sent me home with those poetry magazines, including Poet Lore, the next thing I did was go to my little tiny high school town library, and I literally read over the next couple of months, I literally read every single book in the 811.54 section of the library. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, I guess that's what poetry does, you know? And in so doing, you know, I learned something about how poetry books were made. I mean, it's honestly just so Here Be Dragons, because, you know, like Tainem Bainbrick's first book, Vantage, was organized in this really brilliant way that ended with this kind of essay, right? But then like Patricia Smith's Blood Dazzler is organized in this completely different way, right? And it's like orbiting this like specific event, and the structure of the book is so sort of in conversation with a specific event, just the book structurally. You know, Frost has that thing about how if your book has 24 poems, the book itself should be the 25th poem. And I think that, you know, actually Incendiary Art, by Patricia Smith, was very much that way too in that organization. But I mean, it's just this thing where like, whatever your project is, it's going to look at, you know, the organization and the structure of your book will be sort of like organically as unprecedented as the project itself, right? And so for me to be like, oh, well, you put your best poem first and you put your last poem third from last, or your second best poem third from last, or, you know, I don't know about all that. You know, I just know that like when I have a stack of 40 poems in front of me, they start talking to each other.
And I think too, you know, we talked a little bit about repetition. And I think some of those repetitions that kind of bleed into different poems become almost like a thread that can help organize and guide that organization principle. It's if you see kind of those themes come together, and then it's easier
Totally.
to pull out.
Totally. Like every poet I know has had that moment where you just have that stack of poems and you just kind of like put your head over them, and like iron shavings to a magnet, they kind of just like hit you, you know what I mean? Like they kind of just like all come up. A really good one to study actually is Nicole Seeley. The poet Nicole Seeley has a book called Ordinary Beasts. I think it's Ordinary Beasts, not Ordinary Beasts, but that's a book that is not, a lot of contemporary poetry books are sort of like, you know, uh, let me, this is not a real book, but like, let me dissect my broken marriage using the foil of the voyage of Saint Joan of Arc, right? And like, I'll write these poems about Joan of Arc, but really they'll be about my marriage, right? And that's super cool, right? Like it's cool to like learn about a thing and also like learn about like a historical thing. I mean, like Anne Carson's The Glass Essay, I guess, is like a really good example of this, where she's using like the sort of Bronte sisters, but also the dissolution of her marriage. But Nicole Seeley's Ordinary Beasts is sort of like a book that's just like really good poems. You know what I mean? And like the organizing structure is just like, here are 35 or 40 or whatever, just really, really good, sharp poems, right? And seeing how they move into each, like she has a poem about a piece of art work called Candelabra with Heads, and then she'll have a piece about like how she has a crush on Brad Pitt, right? And then she'll have and seeing how she organized that book, I think is really useful, because I think a lot of the times when you have like one of those project books, then there's like a sort of like natural arc or a natural narrative, right? My first book kind of moved from like really early recovery to sort of middle recovery or whatever, so there was like an almost like chronological arc. But I think that studying books like Nicole's has been really helpful for me in sort of imagining like when I don't have like that really, really sort of clean and crisp narrative, like what do I do to, how do I organize it if I'm not just like being like, this came before this, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely find myself turning to poets' first books and then their second books to kind of see, what's going on and what's talking between the books, but also what's kind of different between them too. And I think that's
I feel like
always
mine, I haven't actually looked at my first book in a minute, but I mean, I'm literally looking at it.
we're staring at it right now.
But like, I haven't like read my first book in a minute, but I feel like from what I mean, like my sort of like hieroglyphic sense of those poems is that they feel like they were written by a completely different person. I mean, they were, but I don't know that if I had the two books side to side without like author names in them, I would know that it was the same poet. I don't know. Maybe that's fanciful.
I think we're almost out of time. So maybe going off of what you said, just then thinking about a final wrap up question, how did you kind of embrace the shift between that first book and second book and maybe leading into new projects? How do you trust yourself to kind of evolve as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I just write, I'm, it's cool to do stuff like this and to get to talk to people. And it's cool to have like a book with a beautiful cover, which was painted by the incredible visual artist, Hannah Bagshaw.
Gorgeous.
And it's like cool to have this thing, but like, even if none of that stuff, I was writing long before any of that stuff existed. Right. And if, a genie comes in and like waves his wand, I don't know why a genie would be using a wand, but like if someone like took all of the like this sort of stuff away and like this sort of stuff, like this sort of like amazing beautiful Zoom conversation, like if all of this stuff just disappeared, I'd still be writing, you know what I mean? The poems hold so much for me, and they're the best technology that I have for moving through this world and finding the next right thing. I think a lot about prayer and poetry, obviously. And I think that prayer works for me in that, you don't, I don't pray for the unhoused and then be like, all right, I prayed for them, everything's better. You know what I mean? Like I pray for the unhoused and then I go buy socks and Cliff Bars and distribute them. You know what I'm saying? And like the poems work the same way, right? Like they don't replace the action, but they point me towards it, right? I think a lot of people get in trouble with prayer when they're just like, all right, I prayed for the thing, my job here is done. You know, I prayed for my whatever, you know, and I think that poems are the same way, right? And so like I write the poems because I need to know how to live. My self-will directed life. It's pretty well documented where that got me. In my first book, it wasn't great. My self-will doesn't want what's best for me. And so the technology of poetry has been really useful in pointing me towards the next right thing. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's what I can say about that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity just this entire evening. I wish we could talk for hours and hours. I'm sure we would have so much to talk about, but we are at our time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so thank you so much, Kaveh. And thank you everyone for coming to the chat and for populating the little chat window with all of
Thank
your
you so much.
stuff. Thank you. And please pick up a copy of the book if you don't have it already. It's incredible, as evidenced by what we heard today. And I just think that it's something that everyone should read. So please buy your copy and support your local bookstore and poets, which we love.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everyone who came through.